Okay, so today we have to talk about the least likely thing you think you would ever talk about in prison. You're starting to see a lot of different aspects of prison, a lot of different sides of it, a lot different than what you thought about it, or really lack of thought, right? That's really what it is, lack of thought. You think about all these ins and outs. You're going to get beat up in prison. I mean, these really rudimentary things about prison. But you have to understand this is a day to day life, sometimes for the rest of people's lives. So this is a routine day in and day out, which just like your life on the street becomes your routine. That is your routine, whether it's the street, whether it's jail, no matter what your environment is, right? It just becomes your routine. And, you think about meeting someone, having a family, settling down, having a career. So you never really think about that type of aspect in prison. But people do meet people, right? Not homosexual stuff. I'm not talking about that. I'm sure that happens. I've seen that happen, of course, but I'm painfully heterosexual. So I used to say I'd do a great bit if I was gay, right? 35 years, it would have been the best bit ever. But people do meet people in prison. And everybody's always shocked to hear that people get married in prison, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about getting married in prison. For the record, I was married twice and divorced twice to the same woman in prison, my ex-wife, Natalie. And actually, she reached out to me and said, you have to talk about the marriage. We have such a rich history that we can make probably 50, 60 of these videos just talking about individual visits and the drama that went on in them, right? But today, first what we're going to talk about is how does somebody get married in jail? So the first step is the person on the outside. If you're in a female prison, the male would have to write the warden. And if you're in a male prison like I was, my ex-wife wrote a letter to the warden saying that I want to marry inmate John Bartolomeo. Could be something as short as that, right? Usually you want to give a little reasoning because you undergo a serious background check insofar as everybody in the whole institution have to sign off and say that it's okay for this to happen. Really, honest to God, from the chaplain all the way down to psychology to, inmate systems management, everybody, every department head has to sign off. So it starts with the letter, okay? The warden receives the letter. And what has to happen simultaneously or shortly thereafter is that the inmate, so myself in this case, has to write a letter and say, I want to marry so-and-so and this is why. So when the warden gets both those letters, they start a packet. And a memorandum from the warden is initiated. And he says, these two people want to get married. So this memorandum will come back to you. You'll see it. You'll know that, this is happening. And, maybe the counselor will tell you, the warden got that, because everybody, of course, right? This can't happen. This can't happen by surprise because both parties have to write a letter requesting this. So after this happens, after the memorandum is generated, after you see it, it starts going to the department heads, to the counselor in your unit, the case manager, then to the unit manager, then to the AW over the unit, the coordinating case manager, the CMC. That's the one that's kind of not in charge, but that, oversees all of the case managers. And then it goes around to the recreation. Every department you can think of, it goes around to, and it has to get approved. Meanwhile, on the street, what your potential spouse is doing is she's making an appointment with the justice of the peace. She's getting a marriage license, just like a regular marriage on the street. You have to take care of all these things, but instead of maybe a church or a function hall, you get married in the visiting room. But I believe my wife there was 4 or 5 couples getting married, so they coordinated it on this one day. The first time was in Lee County Penitentiary in Virginia, and they had no visits earlier in the day, right? They had them at, I think, like it started at 6 at night, or like after count. So 5 o'clock on, 5 o'clock till 8 o'clock, I think, were the visits on Friday night. And they had just added that day, because usually it was just Saturday and Sunday, because it was such a remote location up on the tip of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia. So they coordinated with everybody and the Justice of Peace. It was the same person. They went and got a license. All these people went and got a license in Virginia, valid marriage license, and people showed up. My father showed up with Natalie, and we waited our turn. I think there was 4 couples that got married that night. We were one of them. We got married, and after the marriage ceremony was over, people started having visits. So we had the visit that night as well. So we started at like 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock maybe. We had the ceremony. We hung out, went back to our unit for count. At 4 o'clock, there's a count. And then we came back to the visiting room. And I think my father had left, and I sat with Natalie after we were married. So he named us husband and wife. She had a ring. You could buy a ring. She buys a ring for herself. She buys a ring for me. I can't possess it until that day. Once I put it on her finger, she puts it on my finger. Then I can have one wedding band. So that's one of the only things, you can have, with permission, you can have stuff from the street. But I had one wedding band, no diamonds, couldn't have stones in it. It was just a white gold wedding band that was like engraved on the inside. Of course, they check it out before it comes in. The cops, they look at it, make sure, I don't know what they make sure of, but it's a ring, right? Not too much you can hide in a ring. So I had it. She had her ring. She bought herself a ring. I put it on her. She put my ring on my finger. And we were husband and wife. And then, we had a visit that whole weekend. But the crazy thing about prison is, as I told you before in this forum, is that there was only 2 prisons you could have conjugal visits. And they weren't in the federal system. I was in the federal system. There's one state institution. I always want to say state joint, right? But one state institution in New York that has conjugal visits, and one state institution, as far as I know, in California. As far as I know, there was only 2 institutions that had conjugal visits in the state, individual state systems. They had nothing to do with each other, but they just were the only ones. And that's, kind of incentivized in those state systems to get to that institution, which of course had to be a minimum security institution where you had trailer visits. I was lucky enough, of course, to have a furlough at my second marriage, where I left Danbury. It was a low security institution, and I was going to a minimum security institution with no fences. You had community custody outside. So the reasoning, and they're so hard to get, like furloughs are impossible. You could ask for your blue in the face. You could file every paper you want, never get them. What had happened in my case was that a new warden and a new case manager had come to the institution simultaneously, and they were like, why are we paying for these minimum custody prisoners to get transferred? It's so much money. We put them on a bus. It takes up room on the bus. Let them get there themselves. Once they do finally get to the institution, even if they were in handcuffs and shackles on the bus, there's no fences. They can leave if they want anyway. Why not let them get to their destination themselves? And that's what they were. They were transfer furloughs. And I ended up, of course, you couldn't have a conjugal visit in the system. Doesn't matter what you do. I mean, I've tried a million to get into a bathroom, do this, do that. There's a million moves, and maybe we'll talk about that. We can talk about that later on. We kind of done everything that you could think of in a visitor room. Kind of some wild, wild, wild stories. But I was supposed to take a bus. See, so when you leave a low security institution going to a minimum security institution, you're supposed to take a bus to that institution. They give you an itinerary. You take like a Peter Pan bus, whatever it is, and they stop here, stop there. I had a lot of stopovers because a friend of mine worked for the secretary up in the drug unit where they had actually done all that. They did all the itineraries, and he got me like the longest stayovers here, stay over there in New York, and 3-hour wait from Pennsylvania. So what happened was I didn't go on the bus. I bought the bus ticket, and my wife came to pick me up right at the bus station. So instead of taking the bus, she picked me up, and we drove to the hotel, and then she dropped me off at the bus station. So the town driver the next day is the person at the camp that actually drives people back and forth, getting out, coming in. So the town driver had to come and get us the next day. I couldn't just drive up to the institution. It was, I was supposed to be on a bus, so I kind of had to do that. Walk gingerly through that. But we ended up having our conjugal visit. An end and around play to have one, but we had one. So, and that was the second time I got married, and that was coming out of Danbury. So that's how you get married in prison. It's a long process, and it has to get approved at every step of the way. And it's done in visiting. That's how it's done. Another thing that's done in visiting. And, there was 4 couples that night that did get married. So it's not so common, but it's not so rare either, And I'd love to have my ex-wife do a podcast or do a little bit of an interview or a video, because everybody says, like, why would a woman marry somebody in prison? And it's a valid question, of course, And, about relationships, I always say that the only 2 people that got to understand them are the 2 people that are in them. But very interesting stuff. But a lot of these things that I'm talking about now, that I'm having these little segments on, are from the feedback that I'm getting, and, some of the comments, the feedback, and, that's how these next topics are coming up. So keep subscribing, keep watching. I really appreciate it.